A good vach, Shavua Tov. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? We're coming out of Shabbos. We're opening another week with some beautiful Talmud study. How are you? Where are you tuning in from? It's great to be together. That was Nathanael Hirschtick and the Maccabees singing the Havdalah ceremony, marking the transition from the holiness of Shabbos to the mundane but pregnant with opportunities of the week. Let's light up the darkness. Of course, we got a new wisdom candle to start a new week. Is it going to be a cooperative one? Yes, it is. Who's with us as we get the week started with some beautiful learning? Let me turn that off. Let me put that over here so I can see it. Okay. Excuse me. Melissa says Shavua Tov. Melissa says Shavua Tov from Great Neck, New York. Paula from Chicago. Christo, Shavua Tov to everyone. Hope you had a great Shabbos. John in Sedona. Pauline in Arkansas. Rochelle in Modesto. Judy saying Shavua Tov from Anaheim. Lindsay from Cincinnati. Kathleen Jackson Hodson says, just myself and my son. I'm the only one tuning in. My little man is asleep. Lucy from Minnesota. Renee fought in Indy. Kathleen is in North Carolina. Carrie in Dallas. Tom says Shavua Tov and happy 2021. Chaim with us for a little Torah from Charlotte. Arnold wishing everyone a wonderful week. Harold is with Loretta wishing us greetings. Oregon, right? Betzalel says Shavua Tov. Sal and Nina from Miami. Fred and Peggy in West Virginia. Ann in Merced. Patrice in Utah. Judy likes the music. Tamara in Wisconsin. Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey. And Audrey says kind greetings from Kansas. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas. Sheila in Montana. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, I have a couple dedications. The first one comes from Simei Deweese Cooper, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. And she and her husband, Mark, so Mark and Simei, Mark Cooper and Simei Deweese Cooper, are dedicating tonight's episode in honor of Mark's grandparents, Frank and Goldie Greenbaum, whose yahrzeits were observed this month. May Mark's grandparents' memories for Frank and Goldie always be for a blessing. May their souls be wrapped in the bonds of eternal life, and may the merit of our learning today take them ever higher in the world of souls. And we say amen. And Jackie, may you and Mark and your whole family be showered with blessings for your donation and dedication to our show. The second dedication, very dear to my heart. This one actually comes from my brother, David. He's a doctor in Boston. And he and Mary and their boys are dedicating tonight's episode to our grandmother. My brother and I, our grandmother. You've heard me talk about my grandmother, Magda, many times. We called her Ita. That's because she was Hungarian, but she moved to Chile in the 50s. My first language was Spanish. Abuelita is how you say your grandmother in an endearing way. But abuelita was a very long word for me when I was very little, and I just said Ita. And so she became our Ita. And so David, dedicating to our grandmother, writes like this. Ita, a survivor of the Holocaust. She protected her infant daughter, that's our mom, through Theresienstadt, the concentration camp, and never stopped watching over her family. My brother David shares, we had just moved from Mexico. My parents spent a few years living in Mexico while I was in college, so my brother lived there. We had just moved from Mexico to Bethesda, Maryland. A slight 80-year-old woman weighing 100 pounds with mastery of Spanish and Hungarian, but very little English. She walked to my large public high school and somehow found me in freshman biology and handed me the paper bag lunch, which I had left at home. A story I've heard many times and can really delight in, imagining our Ita just finding her way into this. I mean, my brother went to a massive public school. I think there were like 2,500 students there. And she found the office, she found a person to ask, she found David Litvak and got his paper bag lunch to him. There's no way she was going to let one of us miss a meal. We miss you so much, Ita. We love you. Her Hebrew name was Sarah Bat Golda. And so may Ita, may Sarah Bat Golda's memory always be for a blessing. May her soul be wrapped in the bonds of eternal life. May the merit of our learning tonight carry her ever higher. And I know she's already so high up there in the world of souls. And David, may you and Mary and Max and Abe and the whole family be blessed with infinite blessings from heaven in honor of the dedication that you have created tonight. All the best. And we say Amen. All right. Let's do our learning. By the way, if you'd like to dedicate an episode of AT Daily, our annual fundraiser is over. You can still contribute to it, but we're not, promoting it every day the way we were all through December. Donations always welcome. The suggested donation and the minimum donation are just right there at the front of the page at accidentaltalmudist.org. And what's nice, if you want to honor somebody's yahrzeit, the day they're leaving this world, or a birthday, or if you want to dedicate a show on a specific date, we will honor that with God's help. So just indicate that at the time of making the donation, and we'll confirm it with you. All right, where are we holding? Let's see. We are on Daf Mem Beis. This is page 42 of Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud. Yesterday, we completed our journey through chapter 2 of Tractate Pesachim, so we're opening chapter 3, and this is the first Mishna. Where's my pen? The first Mishna here of chapter 3. Chapter 3, we're going to continue talking about leaven and the prohibition on leaven during Passover. And now we're going to take a closer look at, what constitutes leaven? We just keep saying it's prohibited, you can't possess leaven. But what about things that it's not so clear whether they're leaven or not? So far, we've really just been talking about bread. But there's other products that contain leaven and which can pose problems if they're in our possession during Passover. So let's read the Mishnah, and then we'll get into the discussion. If you're following along, we're near the bottom of page 42a, the new Mishnah and the new chapter. Excuse me. And for possessing these, which are going to be listed, one transgresses the prohibitions, the Torah prohibitions of it shall not be seen and it shall not be found on Passover in the possession of a Jew, although not all of them are considered food, right? So here we're going to see that some just have a mixture that contains a leaven product, and some aren't even food, but they contain what is a leaven food. It's just not used for food. And the list begins. Babylonian kutach. So we've talked about kutach a bunch of times. This was a dairy dip made from sour milk and moldy bread and salt. I bet it tasted great. A dip with a sharp flavor that contains flours, the way it's described here. Median beer, right? So Persia and Media. So this is beer from the Median region. Edomite vinegar, Egyptian zitom, which is a type of beer. Dyer's broth, which we'll discuss. Baker's well-worked dough. And bookmaker's glue. Now, when we're talking about a bookmaker here in the Mishnah, we don't mean somebody who takes bets on horse races. We mean somebody who makes books. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer says the same prohibition also applies to women's adornments, by which they mean cosmetics. I'm not sure, in the Art Scroll it just translates as cosmetics. Here in the Koran they say adornments, but they mean cosmetics. And the Mishnah continues, this is the principle. If one possesses any substance that is derived from a type of grain that becomes leavened, although it is not actually bread, one transgresses the prohibitions of it shall not be seen and it shall not be found on Passover. These substances are included in the warning. In other words, the biblical prohibition of possessing leaven, but there is no element of charis if one eats them. So as we've seen, one who eats chametz, leavened bread products, during Passover is subject to charis, excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. Now we're getting into these, more derivative type of products. They contain some leaven in it, some leavened wheat type grain products in it, but it's really not the primary ingredient at all, or it's far enough removed from bread that we don't think of it as chametz itself. So if you eat it, you still transgress a prohibition, but you're not subject to charis, which is a specific penalty for eating chametz. You're still violating, you're still transgressing a Torah law, but the punishment would not be death at the hands of the heavenly court. Rather, if you actually went, if it could be meted out, the punishment would be lashes. As we've discussed, lashes were rarely, if ever, meted out by a court, by a human court. But the sages are saying this would be the technical punishment for that. The reason people don't really receive lashes is because you would have to be warned that if you do that, you are violating a Torah prohibition, and the punishment would be lashes, and you'd have to be warned within the amount of time that it takes to greet your teacher between the time that you were warned and then you did it. Two people would have to witness the warning and the transgression, and then the witnesses would have to come before the court and say you did it. It's a lot of trouble to punish somebody who ate some bread that he wasn't supposed to during Passover. So the point isn't that lashes were being meted out so often. It's to understand that it's that category of transgression which would be subject to lashes as a punishment. Now the Gemara opens its discussion. Since the Mishnah mentions kutach, this dairy dip, the Gemara cites a brisa where kutach is discussed. The sages taught that three things were said with regard to kutach. It blocks the heart, it blinds the eyes, and it weakens the body. So we're about to talk about kutach and why it's prohibited on Passover. But having mentioned kutach, we take a very familiar type of Talmudic digression to talk about the substance itself and some opinions of the sages about its impact on health and the body. And once we start that, we're going to spend a few paragraphs on matters that are good for the body and bad for the body. These were noted down about 2,000 years ago. So this was state-of-the-art thinking about health and what's good for you and what's bad for you 2,000 years ago. The Gemara explains each statement. It blocks the heart, this kutach, due to the whey, right? So whey, curds and whey. Whey is the liquid part of milk. When you're making cheese and you separate the curds, the whey is the liquidy part. And according to the Gemara, it blocks the heart due to the whey. So the whey in dairy, not good for the heart, according to the sages. Whey was added to the kutach and was considered to be an inferior type of food. Kutach blinds the eyes due to the salt in it, which can be dangerous if it enters the eyes. Kutak contained a strong salt known as sodomite salt. This is salt that you find today at the Dead Sea. And anyone who's been in the Dead Sea knows that the last thing you'd ever do is open your eyes in the Dead Sea or get any of that stuff on your fingers and then rub your eyes with it. It is extremely potent and would sting like crazy if it gets in your eyes. And that kind of salt is found in kutak. So again, you wouldn't want to get any of this dip in your eyes. And it weakens the body due to the mold in the bread, as one of the ingredients of kutak was crumbs from dough that had become leavened to the point that they were nearly spoiled. After mentioning this brisa, the Gemara continues to discuss the nutritional effects of other foods. The sages taught 3 things increase one's waist, his solid waist, lower one's stature, and take 1/500th of a person's vision if he eats them regularly. And they are bread from coarse flour, new beer, and raw vegetables. Similarly, the sages taught in another brisa 3 things decrease one's solid waist, straighten one's stature, and improve one's vision. And they are bread from fine flour, fatty meat, and aged wine. So that may be worth repeating since this promotes health according to our sages. Bread from fine flour, fatty meat, and aged wine. The Gemara explains fine bread is made from refined flour. Fatty meat refers to meat from a goat that has not yet given birth. And aged wine refers to wine that has been aged significantly, which sounds funny to us when I explain what age significantly means. Wine that has been aged significantly in Talmudic times was no less than 3 years old. Now, of course, we live in a time where vintage wines can be 10, 20, 30 years old and are only thought to get better, fine wine that gets better with age. But of course, they didn't have the same kind of bottling and that kind of technology, etc. Wine came in barrels. It was served in pitchers. It was much stronger than the wine that we drink today. It had to be diluted, as we've seen before, 3 parts water, 1 part wine, in order to be served. So it was really a different product. And they basically made it to drink it, but if they allowed it to age 3 whole years, then it became a much more salubrious liquid. The Gemara states a general principle: any food or medical treatment that is effective in healing this sickness or this limb is deleterious for that one. Now that's good sense, right? Don't overdo medicine for one part of your body, because what's good for one part of your body is not good for another part of your body, right? Any food or medical treatment that is effective in healing this sickness or this limb is detrimental for that one. And any food or treatment that is detrimental for this one is effective for that one. Except, and now I'm going to tell you 5 foods that, according to the wisdom of the sages, are good for all parts of the body. And they are moist ginger, long peppers, bread made from refined flour, fatty meat, and aged wine, which are effective to heal all limbs of the body. The Gemara returns to its discussion of the details mentioned in the Mishna. Why is Median beer prohibited during Passover? It is because the Medians placed barley water into it. Now, we might ask, wait a minute, whoa. Beer, for sure beer is prohibited on Passover. Beer is made from grain. Beer is made from hops and barley and oats. I don't know, I'm sure there's wheat beer as well. So beer is a totally prohibited on Passover. But in the ancient world, beer made from grain was actually unusual. The typical source of beer was dates, right? So the normal beer was date beer, and what was unusual about the beer that they made in Medea was that they added barley water to it. It was still date beer, but they added barley water into it. And Edomite vinegar is prohibited because the Edomites place barley into it. Again, if it has the grain, if it has the actual grain in it, wheat, barley, spelt, rye, oats, mixed with liquid, that's going to be prohibited on Passover as chametz. Those are the 5 grains from which we can make matzah, and therefore we can't eat other things made from them during Passover because they become chametz. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, initially, when the temple stood and they would bring wine libations from Judea, the wine would be blessed and would be preserved without any additives. The wine of Judea would not turn to vinegar unless they placed barley into it to achieve this effect, right? So a typical source of vinegar is wine, but with fine wines in the ancient world, they wouldn't turn into vinegar just through aging. They would have to introduce some grain into it, which would kick off the fermentation and turn it into vinegar. And so we had these fine grapes and fine wines while the temple stood. And now the Gemara is going to explain that after the temple fell, we no longer had access to the same kind of wine. Our wine was of a lower quality. And if you were looking for vinegar that came from high quality wine, which wouldn't sour and turn into vinegar by itself, but which would have to have a little bit of grain added to it to create that effect, then you went to Edomite vinegar. And then the Gemara is going to take a spiritual lesson out of that. And now, after the destruction of the temple, Edomite wine does not turn into vinegar unless one places barley into it. This is called Edomite vinegar to fulfill that which is stated with regard to Tyre, Tyre. And the same applies to other enemies of the Jewish people. Because Tyre, the city-state of Tyre, has said against Jerusalem, aha, she is broken, that was the gate of the peoples. She is turned unto me. I shall be filled with her that is laid waste. That's from Ezekiel 26:2. And the sages expound, if this one, Jerusalem, is full, then that one, her enemy, is laid waste. And if this enemy is full, then she, Jerusalem, is laid waste. Therefore, when the Jewish people fall, their enemies can achieve the success that was once attained by the Jews. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said this notion can be derived from here, where the verses state regarding Esau and Jacob. At Genesis 25:23, the one people shall be stronger than the other people. Meaning that when one nation gains power, the other is weakened because they cannot be both strong at the same time. So that's a prophecy that goes all the way back when Isaac was giving the blessings to Jacob and Esau, and Isaac's wife, Rebekah, recognized that Jacob was the one who should continue the spiritual inheritance of the family and bring people closer to the one true God. Esau was a hunter, a man of the field. He was into appetites of the flesh. He was not into Torah. He was not into spirituality. He wasn't going to be the one to continue the path of bringing the world closer to Hashem, commenced by Abraham. And so the blessings were given to Jacob rather than Esau. Esau cried and said, "Father, have you no blessing left for me?" Jacob blessed Esau, but the way the blessings are worded there in Genesis, our sages derive that always, when Israel is ascendant, right, Edom is down, and when Edom is up, Israel is down, right? And so Edom is understood to be the predecessor of the Roman Empire, right? So Esau's progeny would eventually be the Roman Empire. Jacob's progeny are the Jews, and Jacob's 12 sons are the 12 tribes, etc. And so this idea that when Rome is ascendant, the Jews are down. When the Jews are up, Rome is down. And that's the way it was explained 2,000 years ago, at the time when Rome had risen to an astonishing degree, it was the most powerful empire on earth, and destroyed the Holy Temple. And if we look through history, there's a lot of truth to what the sages are saying. It was taught now I'm skipping forward on the page a little bit to continue the discussion of these substances which if a Jew possesses them during the Passover festival, he violates the prohibition on it shall not be seen and it shall not be possessed. And if he eats, he can be lashed for it. That would be the punishment. But one does not receive kares, excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. It was taught in the Mishna that dyer's broth is considered leavened. The Gemara explains, here in Babylonia, they interpreted that this is bran water that people used to dye leather. Yeah, that's good enough. It was further stated in the Mishnah that baker's well-worked dough is also considered leaven. The Gemara explains the nature of this substance. It is bread made from grain that was harvested before it was 1/3 ripe, and then made into a loaf. The loaf was not created for the purpose of eating bread. Rather, this loaf was placed on top of a pot to draw out the filth from the broth. It was further taught in the Mishnah that the kolon of Sopharim, bookmaker's glue, is considered leavened. So now we're really getting away from food. I mean, as we know, you can take flour and water and make a paste that could be used as glue. Kids do that, right, in kindergarten and first grade. But now it's being used as a glue rather than as a food. Nevertheless, it's flour and water becomes leaven, and we can't possess that during Pesach, during Passover. The Gemara explains, here in Babylonia, they interpreted that this expression is referring to shoemaker's glue that is made from flour. Rav Shimi from Chosna said, this is the depilatory paste of the daughters of the wealthy, of which they would leave a remnant for the daughters of the poor, right? So now we're talking about this product that is used. First, we thought, it's being used by people who make books. And they said, no, actually it's made by people who make shoes. And now another sage, Rav Shimi from Chosna, is saying actually the same kind of glue is used by women to remove body hair. But only for, as we'll explain. So this is the depilatory paste of the daughters of the wealthy, of which they would leave a remnant for the daughters of the poor. It was the common practice of women to remove hair from different parts of their bodies by applying various pastes, some of which contained flour. The kolon of Sopharim mentioned in the Mishnah was such a substance. It was given this name because wealthy young women would give the paste, the kolon, to poor young women whose fathers were school teachers, Sopharim, so that the poor women could utilize it as well. Now, what's interesting is, well, what difference does it make who they give it to if the daughters of the wealthy are using this, flour water paste to remove body hair? What difference does it make who they also give it to? And the answer is, when they would use it for themselves, they would mix it together, put it on the body, and remove the hair and get rid of it. So they had no chance to get leaven. But because they would make a certain amount of it, and then it would be left over, and then they would give it, to the daughters of the school teachers who couldn't afford the fancier cosmetics, as it were, then it would have time to leaven. And so that's why it was a problem when it was kept around for a while and then given to these other women. The Gemara asks, is that so? But didn't Rabbi Chia teach a mnemonic by noting that the Mishnah lists 4 items that are used by ordinary people of the state? Kutach, beer, vinegar, and zitom, and the 3 items of artisans, dyers, broth, bookmaker's glue, and baker's well-worked dough. And if you say that bookmaker's glue is the depilatory paste of the daughters of the wealthy, well, then what artisanship is there in that? According to this interpretation, that substance does not belong on the list of items used by artisans, right? If the women are just mixing it themselves, it's not something used by artisans like bookmakers or shoemakers or bakers. And the Gemara answers with another question. And now I'm pretty much done. So if you've got questions, make sure they go in the comments. We had a short one tonight because we did some extra stuff on yesterday's class. The Gemara answers with another question. Rather, what will you say that this is referring to, shoemaker's glue? If so, why did the authors of the Mishnah call it bookmaker's glue? It should have been called shoemaker's glue. Kolan shel ratzanin. Rav Oshaya said, well, actually, one could explain that kolan is referring to the glue of shoemakers. And why is it called the glue of bookmakers? The reason is that bookmakers also use it to attach their pages. And during the time of the Mishna, this paste was referred to as bookmakers glue, those who make books, but it was also used by the shoemakers. They weren't so specialized in their trades that they couldn't use an effective glue just because other people in a different trade were using it also. All right, let's see if there are comments or questions this evening. Okay, hold on a second. That needs to load up. Here we go. Bill Eldridge. Ancient Egyptian beer was more like our modern beer. The Egyptians actually referred to beer as liquid bread and used it as a way to tax grain harvests. But by the time of the sages, the practice had died out under the Romans. Eventually, the practice of turning wheat to beer would revive in Europe as a way to easily tax wheat. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Thank you for that, Bill. Nina and I do a talk sometimes called Schnooks at Sinai. It's actually available, I think, on our website. We definitely made a YouTube version of it. But it's more a live talk that we do at appearances. And we tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt from the point of view of two guys in the back row, right? Like normally when you think of the Jews leaving Egypt, you think of the movie The Ten Commandments or more modern movies, and the camera's always on Moses and Miriam and Aaron, his sister and brother, and Pharaoh, etc. But we turn the camera on two schnooks in the back row, and what it was really like to be part of 2 million people leaving Egypt, just back among the masses, and they were both slaves before God freed us, and they worked for the beer king of Egypt, right? So there definitely was Egyptian beer. One of them was, like stomping on the beer in the same way that we stomp on grapes, getting it to ferment, which is a really horrible job. And he was pretty pickled by those beer fumes rising all the time. And the other one worked in the house as a human fly trap. They were really happy to be freed from slavery in Egypt. Lynn. This was an interesting page, and it stretches into the next volume, the 10th volume in the Art Scroll Talmud Bavli set. We read 9 volumes in 2020. Correct. I just switched over. I prepared for this class by reading it in the Art Scroll, and we entered the 10th volume. In the Art Scroll, it's 3 volumes for Pesachim. In the Koran, it's 2, so that's why the division is in a slightly different place. But here we are, my friends. We are in 2021. Today's January 2nd. We're 3 days away from celebrating 1 year of AT Daily. So we'll try to make something a little special out of that night. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So Tuesday, we'll be celebrating 1 year of this class being together. What a milestone. I didn't really know what I was signing up for when it started. But it's been so wonderful to be learning with you. And I just love, all these familiar names and voices. We get together every night to learn, and you are to be commended. It's a big commitment. I mean, learning every day. It's amazing. But here we are. We're doing it and celebrating 1 year of doing it. Have a great night. Have a great week. May this night, this week, and this year bring all of us nothing but blessings. Let it be a much less interesting year than 2020. Let it be a much healthier, sweeter, more prosperous, more joyful year. And we say, Amen.